Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Milk Bank, I am so excited to welcome everyone today. One of my favorite parts is seeing all the familiar faces, but I'm even more excited to meet new champions for women, children, and families. So thank you all for joining us. As a quick reminder, the Milk Bank's mission is to save infant lives and improve health outcomes by providing access to safe human milk. Since our inception in 2005, we've provided more than 13 million feedings to all those born too small, too soon, or too sick. As an organization committed to achieving health equity, we are deeply concerned by any social determinant of health, including systemic racism, that threatens our mission to save lives. Racial disparities in breastfeeding and in infant mortality are persistent, and they are deeply rooted. When we spotlight equity, sometimes we come from a deficit mindset, and that can make the problem seem insurmountable. So today, while we all get to learn about real threats, both historic and modern, I want us all to imagine a future where we achieve health equity. A future when families have informed consent and choice about how to best nourish their babies, when those choices are supported by accessible and equitable resources, and when inclusive, affordable, high-quality healthcare is available for everyone. And ultimately, when all our babies are given their best chance it can also be more audacious or even deeply personal. But I do want us to all think about how we're going to solve the complex systemic problem of infant mortality and what is needed from our relationships, our process, our leadership, and from us as individuals. So as we get started, I'm proud to share we are powered by philanthropy. The Milk Bank is incredibly grateful for the time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties all of our communities invest into our babies. I really want to thank our sponsors, our grant makers, and our individual donors that make today possible. I want to highlight the passion and commitment from our board, our volunteers, and our staff. And we cannot be more grateful for our milk donors who share such an amazing, unique gift to save lives. And now I have the immense pleasure of introducing Dr. Namani. Dr. Amaka Namani is a board-certified general pediatrician, consultant, and speaker who's on a mission to advance breastfeeding equity and belonging one individual and community at a time. She is a two-time grant awardee from the Pennsylvania Department of Health to improve breastfeeding rates in marginalized communities. She's a chapter breastfeeding coordinator and advocacy committee co-chair for the Pennsylvania AAP, chief healthcare officer for Volunteers of America Pennsylvania, and chair for the Pennsylvania Breastfeeding Coalition. And of special note to us, she is on the medical advisory board of our good friends and mentors and allies at the Mid-Atlantic Mothers Milk Bank. Dr. Namani is the author of Zior's Quest, Mommy's Milk Rocks, a picture book on breastfeeding that tells the story of a 6-year-old big sister who wished for a little sister, only to realize Sissy wanted to breastfeed all the time. In addition to being professionally amazing and inspiring, Dr. Namani really spoke to my soul when she also shared as part of her bio, she's a self-proclaimed fashionista who enjoys reading, traveling, dancing, shopping, and visiting the spa. I think we could all use a little more than that. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Namani.
Thank you so much, Freedom. Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to be here today. I have to say, I think I'm the most excited person in the room. I don't know if anyone's more excited than I am. It's my first time here in Indianapolis, and the reception has been really, really, really warm. So I know I have just a couple minutes, so I'd like to share just a little bit about my story before I introduce Professor Freeman. So all of those things that Freedom mentioned, that those are all true things to me. But I really want to start by sharing a little bit more. So December 9th, 2021, I remember that date very clearly. It was my last day with a healthcare system as a fully employed outpatient pediatrician. It was probably one of the most difficult decisions I had to make in my life. A difficult decision because I know pediatrics is my calling. Like in my next 10 lives, I'd be a pediatrician. Like I love it so much. So I love my patients like my own children. I call them my kids. And I think, people know when they're loved, right? I made a point to treat my patients the way that I would want my own daughters and my children to be treated. And so I worked with passion. It was never about the numbers for me. But the healthcare system being as it is, what it is today, just really became about the numbers. I had a pandemic baby. 4th of July, 2020, to be exact. Tochi was born he came into our lives. And there was just a lot of pressure on the personal side, but also more importantly, as a physician. And so I made that difficult decision to leave. I remember crying, but I prayed a lot because I'm a very spiritual person, and I needed to be sure that it was the right decision for me. Now, interestingly, when I made that decision, I had no plan. And when I said no plan, I mean none. I just knew I needed a break. I'd just been going. I'm going to rewind a little bit and share that I had two of our children, our daughters, in residency. So I had my first daughter as a first-year resident and my second as a third-year resident. The really interesting fact is my husband lived in Nigeria for the duration of my pregnancy, of my residency. So I was a single married mom, basically. So I can relate to a lot of the issues or barriers that some of our WIC moms even may face, right? Just some of those barriers. But when I left, I decided I was just gonna explore the parts of me. I was in the thick of breastfeeding our son, and I was like, you know what? I've always enjoyed writing, like I always have. Mostly journaling. It's therapeutic for me. Any writers in the house, journalers? Yay, I found my people. But yes, and so I was like, you know what, let me just explore that further. And I took a few writing classes through my public library, actually, because I was like, there are free resources out there. I took at least 4 or 5. And then literally one day I woke up and I said to my daughters, actually my family, I said, I want to write a children's book on breastfeeding. And so everyone was like, okay, mom. Like, I think everyone's used to me at this point because I'm just one of those, I just decide I'm going to do something and I do it. And they knew I was serious. But then my then 10-year-old at the time asked me, she said, Mom, no offense, I think that's cool, but I understand why moms want to learn about breastfeeding, but why do kids care, right? And I said, what do you mean, why do kids care? Like, I'm breastfeeding your brother. Don't you think that's cool? She said, yeah, Mom, that's cool, but I don't know if that's a good enough reason to write a book. And it's funny, but in that moment, I realized I needed to go deep and find out why. Like having an idea being cool is just not good enough, right? At least it wasn't for Amara. So I had to go back. And it took me a few weeks. And then I came up with what I now call my 3 E's: to educate, to empower, while entertaining children and really the community on the importance of breastfeeding. And so the journey started. Amara, who was 10 at the time, actually ended up writing the first draft for the book, and it's on my website. And even though in the moment that I wrote the book, I just wanted to write, like I just wanted to share my passion. I also love to read. I'll read anything. Well, actually, I don't read fiction. I'm sorry, guys, for all the fiction readers. I can watch movies, but I have to read like nonfiction. It's kind of a weird fact about me. But anyways, I just wanted a book that I could read to our children, right? And then it was like the more I shared the book, like people literally just started sharing, like, yeah, this is gonna be more than you think it's gonna be. And it's been exciting. It's kind of pivoted me into where I am now, which is more public health and advocacy. So testimonies with legislators really preaching the importance of the benefits of breastfeeding. And it's been such an exciting journey. And now my dreams are bigger than I am. And I'm truly, truly humbled. So that's a little bit about me and the why. And I always like to share the name Ziora so I'm originally Nigerian. I was born in the US, but grew up in Nigeria until I was 16. But yeah. And the name Ziora means teach the world. It's a Nigerian name. So I was very intentional, my entire process of writing the book. So that's a little bit about my why. So thanks for listening to that. But the real reason we're here, I met Professor Freeman for the first time today. And I have to share, before I went on the journey to writing my book, I read a lot. So I recruited the help of our my public librarian, and I told her, give me all the books that have been written on breastfeeding. I read all the children's books that have been written, but I also read some books that were written on the subject of breastfeeding. And I remember Skimmed being one of them, and actually was the first one that I read. And I remember reading this book, like, I had all sorts of feelings, but I was enraged in some pages. And it was just like, my gosh, it was so insightful. And then I went on to Google her, and I was like, dude, how can I not find this? Like, I wanted to email her, I wanted to have a conversation with her, but I couldn't find her. She was nowhere to be found until a few months ago when I found out about this event. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't care what's happening. I'm blocking my schedule. And so when I say I'm the most excited person in this room, I literally mean that. So it's truly an honor to be here with Professor Freeman. So I'm honored to introduce her to the stage. Can go ahead with that? Okay. And so I really want to start by reading an excerpt from the book on page 6. It says, a UNICEF statement lays out exactly how high the stakes are. Breastfeeding is the closest thing the world has to a magic bullet for child survival. Globally, multiple studies link low breastfeeding rates to high infant mortality. Of the 26 largest industrialized and 20 wealthiest nations, the United States has the highest rate of infant mortality. Still true 4 years later. This rate is twice as high for Black infants as for white ones. The factors that contribute to Black women's low breastfeeding rates are manifold, complex, and interconnected. Black women are overrepresented in the government assistance programs that distribute free formula. Now, in her book, Skimmed, Professor Freeman details really how formula was marketed and targeted to Black women in the late 20th century. In her book, she also sheds light on her also personal journey to how she basically could relate in some fashion to the story that she goes on to tell. And I think we can all agree that this was a very insightful read. In fact, this was our book of the month for the Pennsylvania Breastfeeding Coalition in February, and everybody got a copy of this book. So I am beyond delighted to really bring her up to the stage today. Her scholarship interrogates the intersection of critical race and class theory with issues of food policy, health, feminism, and consumer credit. Many of her articles explore her pioneering theory of food oppression, which examines how facially neutral food-related law, policy, and government action disproportionately harm marginalized communities. She also studies the effects of racism by credit card companies against consumers. I'm really curious about that one, I have to say. Freeman teaches constitutional law, federal courts, and race and law at the University of Hawaii William Richardson School of Law. And she's recently told us she actually moved to LA as of a few months ago. I think I'm okay to share that, right? She's a member of the ACLU of Hawaii Litigation Committee and received the Community Faculty of the Year Award in 2015. After graduating from Berkeley Law in 2006, she clerked for Judge John O. Newman of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit and former Chief Judge Jose A. Fuste of the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico. Before law school, she worked in Toronto as a counselor for women and children who experienced domestic violence, and in New York as a production manager in the independent film industry. She's got quite the career. She has an honors degree in history from the University of Toronto. So without further ado, it is my absolute delight and pleasure to bring up to the stage the Professor Andrea Freeman. Thank you.
Thank you. See, I gained a new best friend today. I'm very excited and very, very excited to be here. Thank you so much for coming out today. I hope I get to meet everyone in the room because you all seem amazing. But I have heard these little snippets of conversation as you came in. And I was like, okay, I'm excited to be in your company. I want to thank Maven Space. This is an incredible place. Yeah, I want to thank Jenna, even though she told me not to. And Freedom, the Milk Bank, Dr. Namani. I'm so sad you didn't find me until today, but it's okay. We can make up for lost time. And also the baby in the back who gave me like the most beautiful smile. So I feel really welcome. So I'm going to start by talking also a little bit about myself, some of the journey that I went on to come to write the book Skimmed. And then I'm going to talk about milk for a little while. And then I'm going to get into the material on the Fultz sisters and breastfeeding. So I am from Toronto. Any woohoo in the house? No? No Canadians? Yes. Okay, represent. All right. So when I was a kid, I wanted to grow up to be an actor and a writer. So I studied history and women's studies at the University of Toronto, where I helped found the university's first anti-racist coalition and spent most of my time protesting instead of studying, which is now a thing as well. We're in another period of that right now. So it's I can definitely identify with all those students. After I graduated, I pursued my original dreams in the Toronto theater scene. And I worked as a counselor for women and kids in domestic violence shelters. So my problem was that 8 months of the year, I just didn't want to go outside because I was freezing cold. So a friend invited me to join her in New York, where she was just going to go for 6 months. And from Toronto, New York is like a really warm place. So I went with her. And there I reinvented myself working as a production manager in independent films. And then I decided to stay even after the 6 months were up and she went home. So after I got tired of working on movies for 20 hours a day, that basically nobody's ever seen those movies, got to be honest, I got on a train from the Sundance Film Festival, and instead of going back to New York, I went out to Oakland. And there I started working in independent bookstores. I did some journalism work, and then I taught creative writing to girls on probation. But eventually, all of those, fields were underfunded, and I realized I need to go back to school. So I couldn't decide if I should do creative writing or law. I took the LSAT. I applied to one law school, which was Berkeley. I got in, and then that's the path I decided to follow. So at Berkeley, I was not a typical law student. I actually never met a lawyer before then. And I was a lot older than a lot of my classmates. And then in my last year, I took a class that was also in the architecture department. And I said to my professor, who's now a good friend of mine, I want to write about fast food, which, okay, had nothing to do with architecture, but she said, fine, go for it. And that's where I first came up with this idea of food oppression. So in that paper, I argued that racial health disparities in conditions that are related to food, which are a lot, right? Type 2 diabetes, obesity, strokes, heart disease, cancer, don't reflect people's food preferences or their bad habits or their weak willpower. They're a result of partnerships between the food and agricultural industries and the government. So food policy is basically engineered to profit food corporations and intentionally leaves many people with few or no options for healthy eating. And the further away you are from being a white, wealthy consumer, then the fewer options you have. So racial stereotypes and the common belief that poor health is just ignorance or laziness mask the lack of choice. They make bad health seem like a personal and not a structural problem that the government needs to fix. So instead of getting changes in laws and policies, we just get, at best, some type of education, or at worst, nothing. So people without privilege suffer so these corporations can profit. And that, kind of in a nutshell, is food oppression. And let me try this. It works. Okay. Right. This is my new book. It's called Ruin Their Crops on the Ground, and it's coming out this summer. And here I kind of went back in history and traced the roots of food oppression before it became a corporate type of thing, looking at colonization, enslavement, and attempts to assimilate immigrants, and how the US has always used food as a tool of subordination. So that's just a little preview. Oh, we're not going there yet. I know, now we're excited. Okay, wait, to go over there. Okay, I can't go back. It's fine. You can look at this for a while. All right. So after I graduated law school, I went to clerk for the then Chief Judge Fuste in the Puerto Rico District Court. And it was then that I decided I really wanted to have kids. So I joined an interesting fertility, not exactly a clinic, they had a group. And so the way it would work there is you would go maybe 10 people, and they would sync all of your menstrual periods, and they would put you all in the same city. Like, it was a very odd type of fertility practice. I also did fertility acupuncture, which was maybe 5 rooms of beds with everybody, about 100 people lying down at the same time, and one acupuncturist walking through the rooms, taking in and out pins and talking on her cell phone. So none of this worked. I know, it's shocking. And then my clerkship ended after 2 years, and I moved to Hartford, Connecticut, to work for Judge Newman. And there I had a lot better luck with both the acupuncture and the fertility clinic, but actually had too much luck because I had 3 heartbeats on my first appointment, which I was excited, but the doctor was like, you need to do selective reduction, right? And so I was in a panic because I really didn't want to do that. But then the next time I saw my doctor, there were only 2 heartbeats. So that wasn't something that I had to decide. So I had my twins, who are amazing, but for the only time in their lives, they were early. They 2 months early, and touch and go for the first month in the NICU. I really wanted to breastfeed them, and I was trying, but I never had enough milk. One of the other moms in the NICU had a daughter who couldn't digest her milk, and she was just filling up the fridge with all of her pumped milk. But of course, I couldn't access that and didn't have access to any of the incredible opportunities that the milk bank provides. So eventually they came home, and for the next few months, I just went into this routine. I was, try to breastfeed one of them, try to breastfeed the other, bottle feed one, bottle feed the other, pump, wait half an hour, and then start all over again. So I'm probably not the only one in this room who's been through that, but it was quite intense. It was all day and all night, every day and every night. And I remember when they were talking to me and they said, okay, well, it takes about 11 hours a day to breastfeed. And I'm like, okay, so times 2, right? That's literally 22 hours a day. Okay. So I was also still working full time for the judge. And this whole experience led me on a lifetime path of thinking a lot about infant feeding, formula companies, formula marketing, and multiples. So from Hartford, I moved to San Diego, did a fellowship at a law school there. Then I went to another law school in San Francisco. And then I went to Honolulu, where I worked at the University of Hawaii in the law school for 10 years. And I just very recently, in August, moved to LA. So that's, if anyone's looking for me, you can find me there. Just, Google me up. I'll be there. So as a law professor, I kept thinking about this idea of food oppression and wrote about different aspects of it. And the complicated ways that racism and food intersect. So one thing that I really became interested in is how white supremacists kind of worship milk. Okay. And so I wrote about this in an article. It's called The Unbearable Whiteness of Milk. And it's also a chapter in this book. But I want to share a little bit about that and also the ways that milk and racism intersect in food policy generally. So these are long awaited to find out what you were looking at. These are protesters at a New York anti-Trump art installation. So these neo-Nazis danced around without their shirts, chugging jugs of milk, and said they were demonstrating their opposition to the vegan agenda. So milk also entered the Twitterverse as replacing Pepe the Frog, which used to be their symbol for a time. And this new emoji symbolized white superiority for them. So this is Lawrence Fox, who was a 2021 London mayoral candidate and actor. That's Richard Spencer. He's the president of the White Supremacist National Policy Institute and coined the term alt-right. This guy who calls himself Baked Alaska. Also Tim Treadstone, his real name, Gionnet. He took part in the Capitol riots on January 6th. And help me, there we go. Okay, so these are some websites. You can see this attempt at poetry up there, map tracking lactose intolerance, showing Scandinavia as a lactase hotspot. This is, oh, there we go. Spoiler alert for Get Out, but if you haven't seen that movie yet, well, you should watch it. It's amazing. But there's a really terrifying scene where a white supremacist is slowly sipping on a glass of milk while eating her dry cereal from a separate bowl so the cereal wouldn't destroy the purity of the milk. So this association between white supremacy and milk is not new at all. There we go. That is E.V. McCollum. And in the early 1900s, he was a nutritional scientist who became the first famous dairy booster. So he believed that milk and leafy greens were protective foods that would make up for any other dietary sins. And at this time, the dairy industry really needed a champion because not only was it spreading tuberculosis all over the place, but there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in 1915, also through milk. And he came up, he wrote a bunch of essays in a magazine called Hoard's Dairyman, which caught the attention of Herbert Hoover, who was head of the US Food Administration at that time. So Hoover put him on a national tour where he went around the country and said, people who have used liberal amounts of milk, so these are white people, are progressive in science and every activity of the human intellect. So his way of promoting and selling milk by associating it with whiteness was put into these National Dairy Council pamphlets and distributed all around the country. This is a history of agriculture with a similar message about how people who use the most milk are the strongest physically and mentally, the most enduring, right? You can see this Aryan quote. So even though pasteurization has made milk much safer to drink than in the old days when, I don't know if you've heard of this book, Melanie Dupuy talks about nature's perfect food. Milk killed something like 46% of infants in cities back in the days. So we're not seeing that now, but we are seeing milk connected to, and of course this is cow's milk. Felt like I had to say that because we're talking about another kind of milk here, but okay, all of this. So we have great science on this. Milk is linked to a lot of serious illnesses and conditions. It's also responsible for the obviously less serious, but still problematic condition of lactose intolerance. So most people, except for Northern Europeans, Scandinavians, suffer from what we call lactose intolerance. But even that phrase, lactose intolerance, is racially biased. So most people don't retain the enzyme lactase, which helps us digest sugar lactose beyond childhood. And without it, they experience some pain, diarrhea, other digestive symptoms when they drink milk. But Northern Europeans had to adapt to the cold. And, they lived in this hostile climate, so they drank their herd's milk. And then they developed the ability to retain the enzyme lactase. And very recently, it was discovered that actually Africans were the first people to drink animal milk, but they didn't pass on that same gene, so they didn't continue to digest it. So with most of the people in the world actually unable to digest milk, it would make more sense to call the people who can digest it lactose persistent, as some people do. But instead, whiteness forms the baseline of normal, and any deviation from it is labeled as abnormal or undesirable. And this framing supports the idea of white physical superiority that these white supremacists are celebrating, half naked. Okay, so the dairy industry promotes milk as a good source of calcium, but studies show that there's many other ways to get it, particularly from green leafy vegetables. But unfortunately, there was no industry to pay E.V. McCollum to promote green leafy vegetables, so they fell off. Right? Calcium in milk comes from the grasses that the cows eat, which we can certainly eat similar things ourselves. And the consequences of milk drinking fall heaviest on Black, Latina, and Indigenous people who suffer from all the serious conditions linked to milk and die more often from them than white people. But despite knowing this, the USDA works relentlessly to get more milk into our diet. So in part by giving away large amounts of government cheese. Okay, has anyone here ever had? Yes, okay, all right. So at one point, the USDA actually owned 1.4 billion pounds of cheese. And they stored it like this in underground caves. So since the 1930s, the government has been committed to supporting dairy farmers. And this has become harder and harder to do as we all choose to drink less and less milk. So the white population is declining in the United States. Milk drinking is declining along with it. We are also having fewer children, and children who can digest it better drink more milk than adults. In 1977, President Carter vowed to increase the price of milk to 6 cents a gallon, and the government bought surplus milk to get and keep the price down, but it couldn't store that milk long, so it bought cheese instead. And so every cold storage in the US became filled with cheese. Then the government rented half an acre in a Kansas cave and filled it floor to ceiling with the giant blocks of cheese. Eventually, there were 2 pounds of stored cheese for every single person that lived in the United States. So the government started exporting powdered milk to people in other countries who also could not digest it. And that was foreign aid, but they couldn't send the cheese. So someone came up with the idea to deliver it into poor neighborhoods. So 40-foot tractor trailers would haul 20 pallets of cheese, and then they just throw them out the back of the trucks or give them out to people waiting in long lines. So this strategy was kind of brilliant because it didn't affect the price of dairy, because the people who were getting it couldn't afford to buy it otherwise. It helped the USDA chip away at the surplus, helped the dairy industry keep the prices low. But what did it do for or to the people that were receiving it? Well, popular culture gives us some insight. So here's the 90s comedy show In Living Color. Anybody? Yes, good. Okay, so they had this kind of recurring skit called All Up in the Family, mocking all in the family. And I guess you can read the skit there. What's for dinner? It's your favorite macaroni and the government cheese. And you know what the government cheese does to me. I spend more time on the throne than Queen Latifah. This is a Steve Harvey skit where he explains his complex feelings about cheese and how he used to stand in line all day to get it. More recently, so now we have rappers like Kendrick Lamar and Jay-Z who measure their success by their distance from government cheese. Interestingly, some people embrace it. So we have like the Wahlberg brothers, Marky Mark and them, they have a burger chain called Wahlburgers where they serve government cheese on their burgers. And a famous place in El Paso, Texas called Chico's that put it on their flautas, which is their signature dish. So commodity cheese is also a staple in the boxes of commods that go out to Indigenous people on reservations. And these commods are, in my mind, or I'll argue, a new form of rations that the US government has distributed to Indigenous people ever since they went about destroying their traditional food sources. So the US has used rations throughout history as a weapon, threatening to withdraw them from families who refuse to send their kids to federal Indian boarding schools, and using their withdrawal as punishment if laws about how to have relationships on a Western model were violated. So now these modern rations, the commods, contribute to really high rates of diabetes and other food-related conditions that are present across Indigenous communities. But still, commodity cheese is really popular. So a quiz titled How to Tell If You're Rezzed Out includes the question, every time you see a line, you jump in thinking you're getting surplus cheese. Musician Wade Fernandez, who's a member of the Menominee tribe, has a song called Commodity Cheese Blues that says, I went downtown to the commod shop, met the blues because they were out of stock. Tell me please when I'll get my commod cheese. Visa cheese is a mode of exchange where a block of commodity cheese can purchase other goods or services. And a 2006 Indian Country Today article observed, some Lakota still say to this day that the only brick of gold the Lakota people got out of the Black Hills is the brick of cheese rationed out on Commodity Day. And during the pandemic, while medical professionals and the CDC encouraged BIPOC communities to eat better, the USDA continued to dump free milk and cheese into these communities to help the dairy industry. And this contributed, that's them trying to just get rid of it, to the racial disparities in the cases and deaths from COVID. So USDA also has a dairy marketing branch called DMI that's funded by a dairy checkoff program by dairy farmers. And it partners with fast food companies to increase the amount of food in their products. So this is one of the DMI inventions, a grilled cheese burrito. It worked with McDonald's to create frappes, encourage Pizza Hut to add 25% more cheese into their pan pizzas, and then gave 500,000 of the pizzas away to 2020 high school grads and announced the giveaway on Jimmy Kimmel's Tonight Show. In 2008, DMI teamed up with Domino's Pizza to create this line of 7 cheese pizzas. Okay. So they called this American Legends. And DMI sponsored a $12 million marketing campaign that advertised in the Super Bowl. Okay, I hope you're not hungry because, everybody, if you ate lunch before you came, this is the Taco Bell steak quesadilla, Cheesy Bites pizza. We got Burger King here. All of this brought to you by your government. In 2015, DMI helped McDonald's switch from margarine to butter, increasing butter consumption by 600 million pounds. And so we all pay the price for this increase of dairy in fast food, but it's highest for people who live in food swamps, which are neighborhoods that are saturated by fast food outlets with very few other options. And so although white people actually eat the most fast food in total, it makes up a bigger portion of the diets of people who live in low-income Black, Brown, or Indigenous communities. So DMI is also responsible for the Got Milk campaign, which lasted more than 20 years and has celebrities wearing milk mustaches. I wish I had included in here, but I didn't. But they also ran something about White Gold, who was a rock superstar with incredible hair and nails, who was representing milk, and he had 2 sidekicks who were 2 Black women that he called the calcium twins. So I cannot make this stuff up. It is really, really amazing. So some people objected to Spike Lee's participation in this. And DMI also collaborates with the NFL to reach kids in public schools with this Gen Youth initiative. It has an app, and kids earn points where they can meet NFL players by making cheese and milkshakes, collecting coins in milk jugs, and then giving them to food banks for them to buy milk. So in 2019, 81% of the kids who got free lunches also participated in this program. The US government also gives support for milk in schools by calling pizza a vegetable. It allows Domino's to sell pizza in schools, and it has this special milk program. So at Honolulu's Waikiki Elementary, students can't leave the lunchroom until they drink their milk. They can just throw their entire food in the trash, but they have to drink the milk. And if any public school student across the US wants an alternative milk, they have to go to a doctor and get a diagnosis that they have a disability. Okay. In LA, the public school district against the objection of parents brought chocolate milk back into schools. And a watchdog group there said, I can't think of anywhere else we would do this. We wouldn't serve caramel apples to increase apple consumption. We wouldn't glaze carrots with sugar to get more carrot consumption. Milk is getting this odd pass here. But when you look at the demographics of the LAUSD, it starts to make sense. The district is 74% Latina, 10% Black, and only 9% white. I'm like, do those numbers add up? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Okay. So the federal dietary guidelines that govern school lunches call for 3 servings of milk a day, and that's twice the amount that anybody drinks. Dairy has its own separate plate on this thing. And that's not surprising when you learn that the guidelines committee members include representatives from Nestle, which is the world's largest food company, Merck, Pharmaceuticals, ConAgra, Packaged Foods, Dannon Yogurt, and Monsanto. And 4 out of the 6 members of the committee's Birth to 24 subcommittee have ties to the formula and baby food industries. So now we are coming to what we all came for, the story of the first Black formula models, the Fultz sisters. All right, so this is Annie Mae Fultz. She was a Black and Cherokee woman from Reidsville, North Carolina, who lost the ability to hear and speak in childhood. She was married to Pete, who was a tenant farmer, 20 years older than her. And they already had 6 kids when she learned that she was pregnant with triplets, or so she thought. So on her doctor's orders, she left the tobacco farm where Pete was working and went to stay in the hospital a few weeks ahead of the birth. And when her daughters finally arrived at 1 a.m. in the morning, on May 23rd, 1946, they were surprised by a 4th baby who was hiding behind her sisters. I know, they're the most beautiful. Okay, so these perfect little girls became instant celebrities. They were reported on by papers all over the country. Universal Studios actually sent a film crew from LA to North Carolina to capture the event. And Annie Mae's doctor, oh, okay, just take a moment. How cute, right? Yeah, they're so adorable. So her doctor, Fred Klenner, white man, unapologetically racist. He, had separate waiting rooms. He was a vocal supporter of Hitler, who he said was just misunderstood. He also believed that he could cure anything from gum disease to polio with vitamin C. So he seized this opportunity of their birth when they became famous to try to prove these controversial theories by experimenting on them. So he started injecting them with ascorbic acid or vitamin C on the day that they were born. And when he did this, he continued the horrific practice of experimenting on Black subjects without intending to benefit them that began during enslavement. So many people here, I'm sure, have heard of Marion Sims, called by some the father of gynecology, who performed surgery on Black women without any anesthesia. I removed a picture of him from here because just as the monuments of him have come down, I've decided we don't need to look at him. But I do want to highlight this book by Harriet Washington, which is called Medical Apartheid, and describes how these types of experiments have continued throughout history. You read that one? Okay, yes, you'll love it. With the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which many people have heard about, and many more. So Dr. Klenner just ignored the names that Annie Mae had chosen for her girls. And she went through a long process of deciding on the perfect names, which he then decided he was going to give them all the first name Mary, and then named him after his wife, sister, aunt, and great aunt. So Mary Ann, Mary Louise, Mary Alice, and Mary Catherine. I just love the pictures of Klenner because he's never trying to touch them. He doesn't hold them. He's just always so distant, and you can just see in these pictures how he saw them and how he was. So after that, he started a bidding war among the formula companies that wanted to compete to become the girls' corporate godfather. So it was St. Louis's Pet Milk Company that won, and they got the rights to use the sisters in their promotional materials. Through that contract, Klenner negotiated. He managed to maintain control over the girls so he could continue his experiments. So he had Pet Milk buy some barren land that his father-in-law owned. And then when they built the house, he had them install a window in the nursery, and people would come on the weekends and pay money to look at the girls. So this is very reminiscent of the human zoos, Satya Bartman. It's a kind of a long tradition of exoticizing Black women. Their fame continued to grow through their publicity. Still, yep, so cute. Okay. So he kept them isolated from other kids, even their siblings. So you could see in that picture how that's their siblings looking through the window at them, because they weren't. Dr. Klenner was very concerned that they keep good health, because he wanted to prove how his vitamin C was the reason for them not just surviving, but thriving. So they had this isolated life. And then he had Pet Milk hire nurses that he worked with to care for them. So he would maintain that connection and make sure that they would take them to his office every week for the shot, because it would be difficult for the parents to do it. So the nurses went to Washington, D.C. with the girls because Annie Mae couldn't travel. And Ebony Magazine paid for this trip. No politician would agree to meet with them, but President Truman was just coming out of a building, came upon them, said they were pretty, and then posed for this iconic picture. So the girls were extremely beloved across the country, and this really solidified their fame. So as these Pet Milk poster girls, they experienced things that their parents would have only dreamed of. They stayed in hotel rooms, they went on airplanes, they appeared on television. They marched in parades. Pet Milk made huge profits off of them. The girls lived in poverty. So when they were 6 and they were ready to go to school, Dr. Klenner went to a judge and convinced him that they should be taken away from their family and given to the nurse, Alma Saylor, and her husband as to become their guardians. So they got moved away, far away from the farm. They started to see their family less and less. And they were doing all these fabulous promotional activities, but falling behind in school. Then when they were 15, Alice became pregnant. And the Saylors took her away to Chicago, didn't tell anyone, because it would have been bad for a Pet Milk poster girl to be pregnant. And when she came back, they had arranged, without telling her, for a family to come and take away her baby, which they did. And Alice, throughout her life, never stopped looking for her son. Even on her deathbed, she kept saying to Catherine, maybe he's going to walk in the door, but she never got to meet him again. So Elma convinced Pet Milk to keep extending the contract. And so they had until they were 18. And here is them with President Kennedy. After that, they went to college in Florida, where they also struggled. And eventually they were asked to leave. So the Saylors moved up to Peekskill, New York, where Elma had some family. And there they tried to break into the Manhattan club scene. They had always loved to sing and perform and do music. So they weren't very successful. They had a few gigs. And then at 45, they were diagnosed with breast cancer, all of them, which was very unusual. And by 55, Catherine was the only sister left, and she passed away in October 2018. So Pet Milk's campaign featuring the girls was the first campaign to target Black families to buy anything except for cigarette and alcohol and beauty products. In the first half of the 20th century, companies believed in this trickle-down theory of marketing, that Black people would just want to buy whatever white people wanted, which was not correct. So corporations began to realize that they were missing out on a huge market. And these adorable light-skinned girls were the perfect models for a crossover campaign that opened the door to a new era of marketing, not just formula, but other products as well. Formula was necessary for Black women because they always had to work, right? They couldn't afford the luxury of staying home and nursing. A domestic wife and mother ideal never applied to them. So when welfare was introduced in the 30s in response to the Depression, it offered support for single mothers, but excluded most Black women. Later, more Black and brown women began to receive these kinds of benefits, and then attitudes towards the program changed. And it started to look more like a handout than just a government responsibility. Then in 1996, we got TAMF, which was a much more restricted welfare law, and it allowed states to require new mothers to leave the house as soon as their babies were born or to lose their welfare benefits. So several states did force mothers to give up the labor that they were doing at home to do low wage and low skilled work outside the home. And in these types of jobs, we know breastfeeding is nearly impossible. So employees that see their workers as disposable and interchangeable don't provide paid breaks or safe spaces to pump milk. The US has no federal law that requires employers to give parental leave. And 2/3 of the women who bring suits for pregnancy discrimination against their employers related to breastfeeding just end up losing their jobs. The laws and policies that make it hard for new mothers to breastfeed disproportionately harm Black women. And many people support these laws and policies that create the obstacles because of widespread stereotypes about Black mothers, like the welfare queen. So in the popular imagination, welfare queen is a single and deviant Black mother. She has children just so she can get the benefits to spend on cars or purses or food. And this myth grew from stereotypes that were born during enslavement to justify, the separation of Black mothers and children. So the modern welfare queen combines elements of stereotypes from that time of Mammy, Jezebel, and Sapphire. So the Mammy stereotype, she was a perfect caretaker of white children, but neglected her own kids. And this myth made stealing enslaved women's breast milk to give to white babies seem logical. Jezebel was a lustful Black woman who could never be raped because she always desired sex. And Sapphire was a sharp-tongued ball-buster without a maternal bone in her body. Enslavers made it difficult or impossible for Black women to breastfeed their babies, even though in Africa, breastfeeding rates were much higher than in the new United States. And this led to infant mortality rates that were twice as high for Black babies as white babies. and that disparity has continued into the present. Throughout US history, Black mothers have breastfed at lower rates than other mothers. So I don't know if this is hard to see. Can you read it? Okay. So it's interesting because Latina mothers have similar poverty rates, but higher, a lot of the time, breastfeeding rates. And I think this has a lot to do with stereotypes, which cast Latina mothers as domestic, nurturing, stay-at-home mothers. And at the same time, the lie of the bad Black mother continues today. So we see this in popular culture, we see it in news, all kinds of media, and it explains why images of breastfeeding mothers are almost always white. And most of the images of Black mothers breastfeeding are in formula ads or National Geographic. And the reality is that breastfeeding is hard for almost everyone. But doctors and nurses are not trained to give lactation advice. And they often assume that Black women just don't want to breastfeed, so they offer them formula instead of help. Hospitals in Black neighborhoods have fewer baby-friendly practices. Predominantly Black cities are often first food deserts. Okay, I was going to say donor milk. I'll save that. Okay, that is an answer. It's on the solution side, not the problem side. So first food deserts that lack resources for new mothers. So this is La Leche League, which was really built for and by white women. People attack Black women for breastfeeding in public, and the USDA gives formula away for free to women who participate in WIC. But of course, only certain types of formula. Nothing organic, right? Not your high quality formula. So when WIC began in the 1970s, its advocates actually sold skeptics on it by claiming that the women who would get it wouldn't know how to feed their children otherwise. They said, if we don't do anything, they'll just give them tortillas and beans, right? Which of course is an incredible protein and a great food, right? You can even get on WIC now. But grits was another example that they used as a terrible food that Black mothers would feed their children if they didn't have WIC. So because this program was designed to serve Black and brown women, who legislators thought of as ignorant about nutrition, women who apply for WIC have to submit to a medical diagnosis that they're at nutritional risk. So this involves several visits to the doctor, and it's basically an inconvenient, pointless, and degrading ritual that people who get things like SNAP and other nutrition assistance don't have to go through. And the USDA, through the WIC program, is the biggest purchaser of formula in the United States. The formula companies, in turn, give big rebates back to the USDA, and the rebates pay for most of WIC's programs. This is because the formula companies are making astronomical profits from the USDA support. The formula cans that are in the store marked with WIC look like they have a government stamp of approval. So they're appealing to everybody, not just those who can get them from WIC. And when WIC's free supply stops after 6 months, parents are going to buy the product that their kid is already using. And even though WIC has some very robust breastfeeding support programs, women who receive it breastfeed at lower rates than women who don't. Formula companies also give pediatricians perks like conference funding in exchange for giving out free formula. And the US is the only country that refuses to sign on to an international agreement that prohibits formula marketing to pregnant people and new parents, and that would limit race-targeted marketing. So in the 2018 World Health Assembly, when Ecuador proposed a resolution to promote breastfeeding, the US threatened it with trade and aid sanctions until it withdrew it. Then, at the beginning of lockdown in the pandemic, formula became scarce. So people who could afford to were emptying the shelves in the same way that they were buying up toilet paper. Supply and distribution issues also made it hard to get the supply back to normal. Once people chilled out and realized, okay, we're going to be here for a while, things started to get back to normal until in February 2022, this lab owned by Abbott, one of the few companies dominating the formula market, shut down after some babies died from contaminated formula. So by May, supply was at 40% of what it was before the shutdown. Stores that had formula were limiting purchases. People were driving hours out of their way trying to get it, spending the whole day doing nothing but looking for formula, sending what they could get around the country to friends. And many people just couldn't get it. So they were looking desperately for ways to keep their babies alive. Some people tried to start breastfeeding, even if they had never done it before. Others were feeding their babies solid food. And I think Freedom shared today, 50% of people were doing unhealthy feeding practices, just trying to get to survival. So as time went on with the shortage, data emerged showing that the shortage unsurprisingly affected Black and Latina families the most, because those are the families that the laws and policies have forced to rely on formula, right? And then the government did nothing for them, even though they were the ones who had steered them to it to try to make up for it or help, right? So this is a moment where people started calling me. And I was like, what? Formulas in the news? This is me on CBS News? Wow. Didn't expect that, right? And I sort of felt this hope like, oh, maybe, first food oppression is going to be something that people know and care about, and we're going to see changes. Yeah, well, that didn't happen. One step in the direction, a good direction, was the introduction of the Access to Donor Milk Act. We need full Medicaid coverage, but those are the kind of solutions that would make things a lot easier if we ever see something like this again. We also need, of course, better regulation of the industry, but more drastic measures. We really need corporate influence to just be out of any of these programs. And one way that I think about as a constitutional law professor of achieving this, either through awareness or social movements, is the idea that what is happening here is unconstitutional. Okay. So I look at two things, the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment is, on its face, prohibits slavery and involuntary servitude, right? But from the earliest days in the 1800s, the court has said, when we say slavery, we don't just mean literal slavery, we mean badges and incidents, markers, vestiges of slavery. So basically, if you can show that something happened back then that is still happening now, that kind of discrimination, then that is a violation of the 13th Amendment. And I think what I've shared today, and which I lay out, in much more detail in the book, shows that what we have is a through line from the time of slavery to now of taking Black parents and families' decisions to control the way that their children eat away from them. That is a vestige of slavery. So I think that all of these policies and practices that make it difficult to choose whether to breastfeed or not are 13th Amendment violations. We also have the 14th Amendment, which says we all deserve equal protection of the law. And any of these programs that discriminate against families, and that's not just Black families, but any kind of, anyone really, by race, is a violation of the 14th Amendment. And I think it's really important for people to understand that and to say that's not okay, right? We have law that says that is not okay. All right, so that's my con law pitch, okay? I mean, without our health, we can't exercise any of our rights. So there's nothing more important than health discrimination and health equality, equity, whatever we call it. So armed with this understanding, we need to demand a complete reimagining of society and the workplace from a feminist and family-centered perspective. And really importantly, we need to tell new stories about Black motherhood. Okay, so now I'm ready to talk to you. And I would just love to get any questions, comments, thoughts. Here we go. Okay.
I am happy to pass the mic around for any questions, and we are also going to take questions from our online audience as well. Who wants to kick us off? Ooh, thank you.
Hi, it was wonderful to hear your presentation.
Thank you.
One thing that kind of resounded as I read the book, and it's depressing, kind of soul crushing, is just the control of our laws and government by the billionaires that are supporting all these industries. How do we deal with that in our current political climate, especially, we're on the ground level helping moms like in hospitals and in their homes, but how do you combat formula companies?
Yeah.
They're the most powerful people in the world.
They are incredibly powerful. Um, yeah. No, it's like the $1 billion question. I mean, I really am a big believer in social movements leading changes to policy. And, we do have models that are better in other places, I think, that we can look to. So I just think keep pushing, that the most important thing is to say a government's job is to take care of its people, right? And so, yes, I'm Canadian, I'm a socialist, whatever, right? We look at Europe, we look at other places where governments actually do try to keep corporate influence out of care and safety nets and things. And we just need to push for a model that's closer to that. I mean, I would just blow it up. I'd be like, abolition, reparations, let's start over, but on a more sort of realistic day-to-day, talking to people, I don't know. Yeah. We have to have some feeling of hope. It will change. It's not like this everywhere in every place. So it's possible. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer. Yeah.
Hi. So we've got a question from Renee online, and her question was very similar. Like, this is a huge problem. How do we fix it? She says, I think we all know we need a movement to make change, but where we fall short is not having a way of fixing it. So fixing the government, like how? How do we influence families, especially when we are white? So Renee is a white woman. We're not trusted by the Black community oftentimes. How do we, those of us who want to help, how should we do that?
Okay. Okay. I can certainly speak to being a white woman and thinking about this and how to make a difference. And I think that, maybe to state the obvious or whatever is, not to try to lead, but to follow, to ask people that she is working in service of what they need, what they want, what that they think the solution is, and then work towards that, right? Because sometimes if she's saying there's a lack of trust, it might be because of that dynamic. I think sometimes we want to come in and say, hey, this is the great solution, this is how we can fix things. And that's just not the right way to really come to the best solution, but if you come open and listening, then you may find something that you can do that you didn't think of, right? Because I don't think any of us wants things imposed on us, right? Because we know ourselves best, we know our kids best, we know our situations best, so we can see what we need. Thanks for the question, Renee.
Does anyone else in the room want to speak to Renee or to answer that? Just wanted to throw that out as an option because this is definitely a conversation.
I was just gonna speak and then I actually had a comment or which will probably be a question from the book. So to her point, I think I'm a Black woman, but I found that instead of, how do I say this? As a white woman, you're a white woman, like you can't change that. But that doesn't mean that you don't have power. Like a lot of times you can actually leverage the power that you have to benefit other people. So when you find yourselves in rooms and spaces where you feel like Black women may not have access to, then it's on you to make that space available to those people. So we lift each other up. I actually just finished reading a book, The Moment of Lift. Has anybody read that book by Melinda Gates? Such an amazing book. It's basically about how empowering women can really change the world. But I think you are who you are, but I think, and you actually speak to that somewhere in your book, work from where you're at, right? Like there is stuff that you can do. Talk to people, find out what, speak to Black women. I don't think there is a trust thing, I think sometimes, but in the end, people know when you care. People know when they're loved. And I think that is something that crosses barriers of race and everything. So just use your position or positions and stay open and be aware of your own biases. We all each have our own biases. Not accepting that would be a lie, right? But when you catch yourself, address that and then act on it. But with that said, I actually had a question and a comment before, a comment and a question. So this is a very loved book. I've read it, like I said, 2 or 3 times. So this is one of my favorite pages. When you talk in the conclusion, you said, good health is the foundation for all social and civic participation and for the quality of life that everyone should enjoy. To be effective, advocates of breastfeeding in the Black community should not direct their efforts toward changing the beliefs and behaviors of individuals. Instead, societal structures must change. We must work to dismantle the institutionalized systemic obstacles erected by law, policy, and corporate greed to breastfeeding in Black communities. The role of education is to expose and challenge the lingering stereotypes that falsely make these barriers look like personal choices or failings. And I especially like just this sentence where you talked about there should be affordable daycare centers in every neighborhood that nursing employees can go to throughout the day without penalty or pay reduction. WIC's expenditures on breastfeeding support should be equivalent to its formula purchases. And I don't know if during your research, if you found out how much for every dollar that WIC invests in formula, this is how much they invest in breastfeeding education or resources. I'm curious, and maybe if there are any WIC employees here that can speak to that, I'd also appreciate that. But thank you. I mean, I didn't think I could learn any more today, but I learned a whole lot more. Thank you.
Okay, that's nice. I don't have numbers for that, but I think that is a great thing to find out. And I know that when I've met with people around the country who work for WIC, they always feel underfunded and undersupported. Whereas I'm pretty sure the formula companies are not feeling that, right? If they have feelings, which yes, corporations are people. They have First Amendment rights, they have 14th Amendment rights, so they must have these feelings too. Yeah.
Diane, did you have any other questions online?
So this one is from Christine. She says, how do we balance the influence without removing formula as an option for parents who cannot breastfeed?
I think option is really the key word there, right? Because all of this is about choice. It's not about what's better and what people should do. It's about you get to do what you want to do, right? So the kind of reforms that I'm thinking about and what I'm talking about is awareness of why something that might feel like a choice might not be a choice, right? Is like you may choose to breastfeed, but if you go to work and you can't pump and then there is no choice, right? You're not choosing formula, you're choosing survival, right? So really, I think everybody needs to be able to choose. And I think, formula is a great option, right? My kids had it, a lot of our kids had it. It's great. It's just, it needs to be an option, not dictated.
I see a question over here.
Hi, I'm going to go to the law side of this. So you've lived in a lot of places, you've seen a lot of political climates, you've seen a lot of everything. Are there fiscal policies that you think are, I just remember seeing all that milk being poured out during the pandemic, being like those poor dairy farmers who are not part of these big conglomerate, they all are, but like a family dairy farmer is really hurting because the price of milk is so low. So there's also these weird checks and balances throughout, which clearly are on the side of corporations at this moment. But have you seen anything that would help balance that out so that the family dairy farmer isn't pushed off their family, you know what I mean? Like their long-term sustained generational whatever work, while also allowing for choice, allowing for the rest of us to not be under the influence of like big dairy.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really tough with milk because the way that the support has gone like over the past century is just we have a very fake market, right? So it does not supply and demand. It's like we don't care what the demand is. We're going to keep the supply up. And then the government constructed this entire support system that then, yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So is there a balance there or like, I mean, I'm also for like, let's blow up the format and start over. Where's the balance and how can we both correctly?
Yeah. I mean, really, yes, to the Farm Bill, because this is where it's all happening, right? And as people become more aware of the problem, then they're trying to become trickier with the Farm Bill. So they put in all of these amendments so that you don't even know who the subsidies go to, right? Because when it has been exposed, it's been like these millionaires and billionaires are getting tons of agricultural subsidies. People who are deceased are getting agricultural subsidies. People who are, have never set foot on a farm are getting them, right? Like this system is so broken and it doesn't at all reflect our nutritional needs, our desires for what we want to eat, right? And this has been a process since the 30s of these larger corporations realizing they can capitalize on this government support, as you said, pushing out the smaller farmers, consolidating and finding ways to just keep getting it and then gaming the system so that you wouldn't even know it's them. And we still think about that local dairy farmer, which they hardly exist anymore. Right. I think that in that way, you might want to push for just more local consumption, putting your dollars towards it, right? Because those are the farmers that cannot, provide nationally. And then we have things like laws in the National School Lunch Program where they'll say, if you're going to serve something in the cafeteria, it has to be distributed nationally. And those are the kind of smaller laws that make it more difficult for the local farmers to sustain themselves. So that's something you could push to get rid of, right? So any kinds of laws like that are more about making things bigger, we try to make them smaller. And those are more local laws, like state, city, municipal, districts that have flexibility. And so you can maybe have more impact there.
We're going to take one more question from our incredible online group. Sounds like it's exciting out there.
It's hot in here.
Oh,
There's a lot of questions.
are you recording them? I want to see them later.
Yes, and I
Okay.
think probably these will be some great questions to continue the conversation. This is from Denise in New York, actually. And she says, can you speak to the impact and importance of doulas who are IBCLCs and CLCs supporting birth in hospitals and supporting that first latch? I'm going to combine it with another question. Do you have any suggestion for IBCLCs who want to support infant feeding choices in the hospitals they work in?
Yeah, I wish I knew more about, I think doulas are wonderful. Everybody that is doing this kind of work, it's so important. So I think it's so important to have an advocate with you. And I think that we just really need a lot of funding for people doing this work, because every lactation consultant that I have met has not made enough money, has worked so overtime and hard without getting paid for it. It's outrageous, right? It's like the best work that gets done is within communities, and it's basically free work. And I really think the government needs to step up and pay for people doing that work, who are driving around to people's houses, and sitting there with parents trying to breastfeed because they care and they want to do it, but they're not even getting paid. Even people I've met who just go on social media and say like, hey, I'm a Black woman and I breastfeed, and they show pictures of them. I'm like, that's valuable too, right? Like, no more uncompensated work for things that the government should be paying for. Yeah. Okay.
One more question, Professor Freeman. I'm over
Hi.
here.
Hi, Shelley.
We had one more question that came up, and that was with respect to, there are some pending lawsuits, many actually, dozens, surrounding the issue of necrotizing enterocolitis, which is a disease of very newborn babies. And it is targeting both formula companies and then some other types of organizations, healthcare organizations are getting pulled into that. But have you done any investigation or research into kind of the tie between the formula industry and this type of action and kind of direct action that you discussed earlier?
Yeah, there's a guy who's, I think he's in Seattle. He's a lawyer up there, a Black man who is trying to bring a lot of these suits. And he wanted me to go on his website and be like, he's a great lawyer. And I just didn't know, like, I felt weird about it. But I do know there is a movement against the formula companies because of this. And it seems like the research I did, I was like, yes, this seems like a good way to potentially get at them and try to make them more accountable. But I don't know a lot about it. Yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'm going to actually walk right up here if this is
good.
okay.
Hi.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelley Jackson. I'm actually one of the board members of the Milk Bank, and so excited to be here and really have this opportunity. So I'm going to share a few closing words, if that's okay. And we really appreciate you coming, Dr. Freeman, and giving us all of your wisdom and information about this very important topic. So I'll just share a few closing remarks, and then we will move forward. So the first thing I wanted to say is that there were a few words that came to mind regarding our conversation today. It was listen, it was be open, it was be curious. I heard all of these things come through the conversation today. So I want to thank all of you for being here, for listening, for being open, for investigating. And I want to thank our guests today. Professor Freeman, sharing your research and all of the information that you've done. Dr. Namani, it's been a pleasure to meet you and to hear all about your journey and your book and your family. And I love this connection that happened today. This is fantastic. So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your wisdom, sharing everything that you brought with us today. Again, thank you for everyone that decided to come today. I have a few things to share with you that I wanted to leave you with as we go. The first is, gotta have my glasses. That's the first thing. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much to our sponsors. We had so many people who sponsored today, whether that was in kind, whether it was a financial donation. In particular, we wanted to mention the Indiana Hospital Association, which made this webinar. I know we have lots of people watching via a webinar. Thank you so much for joining, but thank you to IHA for making that possible for us today. We also had Community Health Network sponsored our book giveaway. So there will be a raffle and a book giveaway that is occurring a little bit later today. So thank you to both of those sponsors, as well as every sponsor that you see up here on the screen. Thank you so much. We also wanted to talk a little bit about sponsorship, donors, all of the ways that people engage in philanthropy on behalf of the tiniest members of our community. We have a sweet, beautiful one sitting here right in the back of our room, but we appreciate the work that all of you do every day. And so we ask you to get engaged in the different ways that we provide support to our community. I'm going to just list a couple of them. Education, resource for healthcare partners. We have a medical relief fund. We offer outpatient care. We do all of these different services for families. We support families who are facing infant loss, one of the most difficult things that a family can go through. And so we ask that you consider supporting us by getting involved with us, by donating, and we have a fundraiser coming up called Fund an Ounce. So we'll ask you to very thoughtfully consider whether you can support Fund an Ounce to continue the great work that is happening here with the Milk Bank and all of its staff. So thank you again for joining us. It was a pleasure. Again, my name is Shelley Jackson. I'm a member of the board here at the Milk Bank and very, very happy to meet all of you. Have a good afternoon. Take care.